Did you notice the 4 escape pods falling from the side during the Artemis II launch? No one realized that Christina Koch's limping gait as she departed might reveal this was a Hollywood hoax. First, careful netizens reviewing the Artemis II launch footage spotted several square-shaped objects falling from the side of the launch pad less than 5 seconds after liftoff, exactly 4, matching the number of astronauts. Many viewers speculated that the crew entered these square escape capsules right after boarding the rocket, then ejected to a film studio to complete all subsequent filming. Second, Christina Koch, the only female astronaut among the 4, appeared extremely nervous during her pre-boarding interview. She could barely walk properly when entering, nearly moving her arms and legs in sync. Such poor coordination would seem to disqualify her from being an astronaut, though some claimed the bulky spacesuit made it hard to move. Lastly, Victor Glover was seen shirtless inside the spacecraft, wearing only shorts, which is highly unusual. The temperature and ventilation inside the capsule are strictly regulated, so being unclothed would be cold and uncomfortable. Some claimed it was a body wiping scene, but why would such private footage be filmed? It feels more like a tactic to attract views. Strangest of all, while every other object floats in space, the iPad remained completely stationary.
Everybody really over here just doing their thing. Nobody really even thinking about this man talking about they going to the moon on April Fools. And Easter is on April 6th or April 5th. So during the Passover, they gonna be up over there trying to get to the moon. What's going on? I feel like I live in a whole different place. I look on my timeline and I'll be just waiting for something to pop up that's relevant, because what is going on where everybody is just acting like it's nothing going on? We just had a fire eclipse and it's been fire ever since. They talk about Kentucky got aliens dropping fire on the lands in Kentucky, in Florida. Aliens! This is what they said. I don't know if y'all not seeing this, because I just saw it and I was looking for it like somebody gonna be talking about this, and y'all not. So I need you to go look it up. Go look it up. Kentucky aliens, the people is fighting the Kentucky aliens that's starting the fires. That's what they said. Shit now. I seen it, and so I'm sharing it with y'all that we need to get ready for something, because they talking about going to the moon during the Passover. They just killed everything in the Muslim land during Ramadan, and everybody on the earth is just kumbaya around here. I just need my private sector. Can y'all just put me in District 9? I just need to be over there with the divergence. I'm divergent.
Reed Wiseman and Jeremy Hansen will be up first to capture imagery and
So you're telling me that this jar of Nutella just magically flies into frame for everybody to see? I mean, come on, does anybody truly see what is happening here? What is going on? Or is it just me? Because honestly, if you can't see what is going on here with all of this stuff, with this Artemis II stuff, I don't know what more to add at this point. Because honestly, when you begin to look at everything, it just writes itself. I mean, what are the odds that a Nutella jar just magically flies into frame perfectly so you can see the jar of Nutella? Come on, y'all. Does anybody truly believe any of this? Again, this video is for entertainment purposes only. I'm sure that they are really in space. I'm sure this was just a coincidence. There is nothing to see here, right? Right. Again, the jokes just write themselves. Just like the fact that they flew to space on April Fool's Day. Come on, wake up.
Yeah, I think this real or not.
We did have our first view of the moon far side, and it was just absolutely spectacular. I think that one of the interesting things that happens when you look at a moon that inherently just looks different is like the darker parts just aren't quite in the right place, and something about you senses that is not the moon that I'm used to seeing. And sure enough, we got out our lunar targeting information, and we matched up, and we're like, yeah, that is the dark side. That is something we have never seen before. We must be, no kidding, like Reed said, somewhere between the Earth and the moon, getting a view from a different place and putting up something that has meant so much to so many cultures, scientifically, spiritually, culturally, for so long, seeing it in a different way, and just pairing that with how much we miss and love our families and knowing that they're looking up and seeing the same moon, it's a pretty amazing feeling.
You're getting a live look from Orion as the crew observes a solar eclipse from the moon.
It is bright, and Earthshine is very distinct, and it creates quite an impressive visual illusion. Wow, it's amazing. Now there's a very bright spot. There's a very bright spot in the center of it. There's a towering light of. There's a towering light, and then there were like two streamers that were going 30 degrees out from it, and now it is just extremely bright.
To prove to the flat earthers and the people that think space is not real, they decide to broadcast from the Artemis 2 tomorrow on Netflix. It will be a live broadcast where you will be with the team from Artemis 2 as they pass the surface of the moon. For those of you that don't know, part of the mission was to wrap around the moon and come back to Earth. They've only been up there for a few days and already they are to the moon. Now there's a lot of people that don't believe in space and think that the whole thing is a hoax and broadcasted from a
NASA's astronauts on the Artemis 2 mission have chosen their own meals for the journey around the moon and back. From sausages to cashew chicken curry to shrimp cocktail and even chocolate pudding cake, it's all on the menu. But this isn't normal dining. There's no fridge and no resupply on board the Orion spacecraft, and everything has to work in zero gravity. But no, they won't be eating freeze-dried ice cream. Instead, think tortillas, not bread, so crumbs don't float into equipment. Meals are often freeze-dried, brought back to life with hot water, or ready to eat and heated on board. There are even personal snacks, from nuts to space-safe comfort food. And we know that Canadian crew member Jeremy Hansen is bringing maple biscuits with him. Every bite is carefully planned. Calories, salt, hydration, and nutrition are all tightly controlled. Because on Artemis 2, food isn't just about comfort.
Interracial alien mating? What the F is going on? Look, wait a second. You had whistleblowers tell you this kind of thing? Can you please unpack that?
Yeah, I had a guy who was uniformed. He was a senior enlisted with the United States Army. Came into my office in Crestview, Florida, in a non-classified setting. I had members of my staff there, and what they explained is that the military ran a very secret program where aliens that were living were in forced breeding programs with humans that had been abducted from war zones and from even the caravans of migrants. Now, again, I didn't verify this, but what the whistleblower was telling me is that there were like between 6 and 12 locations around the country where this happened. And what he wanted was a group, members of Congress, to all show up at the same time at all of these different locations so that any of those activities could not be moved. And of course, it's a physical impossibility to get members of Congress to simultaneously show up at like 8 locations at one time. And so that never occurred.
There's a weird alien UFO conspiracy going on in central Kentucky, and the conspiracy just so happens to be within the area known as Kentucky's Bermuda Triangle. The first oddity in this puzzle piece story can be found just off Walnut Meadow Road in Madison County. It's the Berea Community School, a product of some sort of bizarre modernistic architecture, and it's believed to be an homage to unidentified flying objects because of its peculiar appearance. But why here? Why in a small rural community in central Kentucky? Well, some folks think it's because there's an extraterrestrial presence in the area. I've talked before about the beliefs and conspiracies surrounding the Bluegrass Army Depot, which is located in the same county as the Berea School, and the mysterious informant from the 90s who claimed to have insider info on some kind of big government cover-up. And sure, all of this sounds like folklore, and technically it is, but it starts to get kind of weird once you start piecing all of the related stories together. Just about an hour away from the UFO school is, or at least once was, a site known as the Alien Crash Site. A man in Burnside, Kentucky claimed to have a downed UFO just sitting in the woods on his property. He erected a website dedicated to this alleged phenomenon and kept a live video feed of the craft running around the clock. Unfortunately, the website has been gone for quite some time now. Amidst all of this, the stories and the conspiracies, the UFO sightings, and the high strangeness is a little known and rarely discussed geological anomaly. This seemingly rare anomaly causes a disruption in the Earth's magnetic force. To be more specific, this area holds the largest spike in the Earth's geomagnetic field in the Western Hemisphere, according to NASA. And incidentally, it also runs through the ground beneath all these sightings, stories, and strangeness. It's known as the Kentucky Anomaly, and for years, I personally have been trying to find information on it, but with little to no success. So what does all this mean? Does it mean anything at all, or is it just another factor in why Kentucky is truly the strangest and spookiest state in the whole country? Leave me a comment and let me know, and don't forget to follow for more spooky stuff.
They're approximately 5 feet, 4.5 to 5 feet tall. They had one or two of them around that were 230 years old, and we have a total of at least 18 that exist and operate.
In November of 2011, in the Mammoth Cave system of central Kentucky, a 4-person survey team entered an unexplored section of the cave network through a newly discovered passage. The cave system beneath those hills is the longest known in the world, with over 400 miles of mapped passages and countless more that have never been documented. The team was conducting a geological survey for the National Park Service, mapping newly accessible tunnels that had been sealed by a rockfall since at least the 1940s. Their assignment was supposed to take 3 days. On the first day, they discovered evidence that something was living in those passages. Something that had been there for a very long time. By the time they reached the surface, one team member was dead and another was missing. The 2 survivors refused to go back underground. When rescue crews entered the passage to recover the bodies, they found the dead liaison, but no trace of the missing biologist. What they did find was evidence that the survey team had not been alone in that section of the cave. Tracks in the mud that did not match any known animal. Scratch marks on the walls at heights no human could reach. A smell that the rescue team described as something between rotting meat and wet stone. The passage was sealed permanently 5 days later. The official explanation was structural instability. The unofficial explanation was documented in reports that only a handful of people have ever seen. Something lives beneath those hills. Something that does not want to be found. Listen closely, because the account starts now. My name is Phelan, and this happened to me in November of 2011 in Hart County, Kentucky, about 40 miles south of Louisville, in the cave system beneath Mammoth Cave National Park. I was 39 years old at the time, working as a geological surveyor for a private consulting firm that contracted with the National Park Service. My specialty was karst topography, the limestone formations that create cave systems. I had been working in caves for 16 years, mapping passages, documenting formations, assessing structural stability. I had been in caves on 5 continents. I thought I understood what lived underground. Before I took this assignment, I had spent most of my career believing that caves were empty places, geological features, stone and water and darkness, nothing more. I knew about cave fauna, of course. The blind fish and albino crayfish and specialized insects that had evolved in lightless environments. I had documented dozens of species that lived their entire lives without ever seeing the sun. But those were small things, harmless things. Creatures that had adapted to their environment through millions of years of gradual change. I never considered that something larger might have made the same adaptation. Something intelligent. Something that had been living in the darkness for so long that it had become part of it. The survey assignment came through our office in early October. The Park Service had discovered a new passage in a remote section of the Mammoth Cave system. A standard inspection of a rarely visited area had revealed that an old rockfall had shifted, opening access to tunnels that had been sealed for at least 70 years. Historical records suggested the passage had been known to early cave explorers in the 1800s, but had been blocked by a collapse sometime before the Second World War. The Park Service wanted a full geological survey before deciding whether to develop the passage for public access or seal it permanently. They needed someone to go in, document the formations, assess the structural integrity, and report back with recommendations. They assigned a 4-person team, myself as lead surveyor, a woman named Orlith who specialized in cave biology and had been studying the Mammoth Cave ecosystem for 8 years. She was one of the foremost experts on troglodytic species in North America. A younger surveyor named Declan who handled the mapping equipment and laser scanning. He was 27, enthusiastic, still excited about the work in a way that older surveyors often lost, and a Park Service liaison named Brenna who would coordinate our findings with the administrative team. She had worked at Mammoth Cave for 12 years and knew the documented passages better than anyone. We met for the first time in the park's administrative building 2 days before the survey. Orlaith spread topographic maps across the conference table, while Brenna explained what the Park Service knew about the newly accessible passage. The historical records are incomplete, Brenna said. We know the passage was documented in the 1880s by a surveyor named Edmund Bishop. He mapped about 200 feet before turning back. His notes mention unusual formations and a strong airflow suggesting the passage continued deeper into the system. What made him turn back? Declan asked. Brenna hesitated. His notes say he heard sounds that he could not explain. Sounds coming from deeper in the passage. What kind of sounds? Orlaith asked. Brenna shook her head. The notes are vague. He describes them as like wind, but not wind. Like breathing, but nothing alive could breathe that deeply in those tunnels. I studied the map. The passage Bishop had documented was located in one of the least accessible sections of the cave system, far from any maintained tourist routes. Getting there would require several hours of navigation through documented passages before we even reached the rockfall. The collapse happened sometime before 1942, Brenna continued. A survey team in that year found the passage completely blocked. They assumed it was a dead end and moved on to other sections. Nobody tried to reopen it until the shift was discovered last month. Who discovered the shift? I asked. A maintenance crew checking water flow in that section. They noticed increased airflow and investigated. Found the gap at the top of the rockfall. One of them looked through and saw the passage continuing beyond. Did they go in? Orlith asked. Briefly, maybe 50 feet. They said the passage looked stable but extensive. They recommended a full geological survey before any decision was made. I noticed Brenna did not meet our eyes when she said this. I wondered what else the maintenance crew had reported. What details had been left out of the official briefing. We spent the rest of the meeting reviewing equipment lists and safety protocols. We would be underground for 3 days, camping in designated areas, maintaining radio contact with surface teams at scheduled intervals, standard procedures for extended cave surveys. None of those procedures would matter once we passed through the rockfall. We entered the cave on a Monday morning through a maintenance access point about 2 miles from the main visitor center. The first section of our route followed documented passages, tunnels that had been mapped and maintained for decades. We moved quickly through this familiar territory, reaching the newly opened section by early afternoon. The rockfall that had sealed the passage was massive. Boulders the size of automobiles were piled against the tunnel walls, the debris of a ceiling collapse that must have been catastrophic when it occurred. But time and groundwater had shifted the rubble. A gap had opened near the top of the pile, maybe 3 feet wide, just enough for a person to squeeze through. Declan went first with the surveying equipment. Orlith followed, then Brenna. I brought up the rear, dragging our supply pack through the narrow opening. The passage beyond the rockfall was different from the caves I knew. The air was colder, damper. It carried a smell that I could not immediately identify. Not unpleasant exactly, just unfamiliar, like minerals and water and something else that my brain could not categorize. An organic undertone that suggested biological activity, though I could not imagine what kind of life could exist this deep underground. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, our headlamps barely penetrating the absolute blackness. No twilight zone here. No ambient light from the entrance. This was the kind of darkness that pressed against your eyes, that made you question whether you were seeing anything at all, or just imagining shapes in the void. The walls were smooth in places, carved by water that had been flowing through this passage for millions of years. In other places, the stone was rough and jagged, the result of more recent fracturing. The floor was covered in fine sediment, disturbed by our footsteps into clouds that hung in the still air before slowly settling back down. We documented everything as we moved deeper. Declan ran the laser scanner, capturing precise measurements of the tunnel dimensions. Orlith examined the walls and floor for signs of biological activity. I studied the rock formations, looking for evidence of structural weakness that might indicate danger. For the first 2 hours, we found nothing unusual. Standard cave features, limestone formations, mineral deposits, the occasional fossil embedded in the walls. Declan documented everything methodically, his laser scanner capturing precise 3-dimensional maps of every chamber we passed through. Around the 2-hour mark, Orlith called us over to examine something. She was kneeling beside a section of wall where the stone was marked with scratches. Long parallel gouges in the limestone, running from floor level to about 8 feet above the ground. "What made these?" Declan asked. Orlith ran her fingers along the marks. They were deep. Whatever had made them had applied significant pressure, carving into solid stone with enough force to leave permanent impressions. "These are not natural," she said. "Not water erosion, not geological fracturing. Something made these deliberately." "An animal?" Brenna suggested. Orlith shook her head. "No animal I know of could carve limestone like this. The marks are too regular, too parallel. This required sustained pressure over time." I studied the scratches more carefully. They reminded me of claw marks, but the scale was wrong. The spacing between the gouges suggested something much larger than any cave animal I had ever encountered. "How old are they?" I asked. Orlith examined the edges of the marks. The limestone showed signs of secondary mineral deposits within the gouges, suggesting time had passed since they were made. "Years," she said. "Maybe decades. Whatever made these is not recent." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that whatever had carved those marks was long dead or long gone. We continued forward. The scratches appeared at irregular intervals along the tunnel walls, always at the same general height, always running in parallel lines. Like something had been moving through this passage repeatedly, brushing against the walls as it traveled. Then Orlith stopped again. She was examining a section of the tunnel floor where the mud was thick and soft. I came up beside her and looked at what she was studying. Tracks. Not human tracks, something else. The impressions were about the size of a human hand, but the shape was wrong. Too elongated. Too many digits. And the depth suggested something heavy, something that pressed hard into the mud as it moved. The tracks led deeper into the tunnel, disappearing into the darkness ahead. "What made these?" Brenna asked. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tension beneath it. Orlith shook her head. "Nothing I recognize." I studied the tracks more carefully. The mud was damp, but not wet. The impressions had been made recently, within the last few days at most. Something had walked through this passage while we were planning our survey. something that had emerged from deeper in the cave system and traveled toward the rockfall that we had just passed through. I looked back at the gap we had squeezed through. If something had come through here recently, it would have had to climb over the same rubble we had traversed. It would have had to navigate the same narrow opening. We should document this and continue, I said. Whatever made these tracks is probably long gone. I wish I had been right. We continued deeper into the passage, following the tracks as they wound through the tunnel system. The cave branched in several places, and each time we reached a junction, the tracks led us in a specific direction. Whatever had made them knew where it was going. It was not wandering aimlessly. It was traveling with purpose. After about an hour, we reached a larger chamber. The ceiling rose 30 feet above us, the walls curving outward to create a space maybe 50 feet across. A small stream flowed through the center, the water clear and cold, running over smooth stones before disappearing into a crack in the far wall. The chamber showed signs of habitation. Not recent habitation, something older. Bones were scattered along the far wall, piled in a rough heap that had been there for years, maybe decades. Animal bones mostly. Cave rats, bats, a few larger specimens that might have been raccoons or possums that had wandered too deep. But mixed among the animal remains were other bones, human bones. Orlith was the first to recognize them. She knelt beside the pile and examined the fragments without touching them. "These are old," she said. "Decades old at least. Maybe older." I counted what I could see. Femurs, rib fragments, a partial skull, yellowed and cracked, missing the lower jaw. The remains were arranged haphazardly, as if they had been dropped here over time rather than placed deliberately. "How many people?" Brenna asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Orlaith studied the pile for a long moment, carefully separating the human remains from the animal bones with her eyes. "Based on the femurs, at least 3, maybe 4. The bones are mixed with animal remains, so it is hard to be certain." We stood in silence, trying to process what we were seeing. 4 people had died in this chamber, their bodies left in a pile against the wall like discarded refuse. No one had reported them missing. No one had searched for them. They had simply vanished into the cave and never emerged. "The 1800s, Declan said quietly, when this passage was still open. Cave exploration was dangerous. People died all the time. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that what we were looking at was a historical tragedy, the remains of early explorers who had gotten lost or injured or simply run out of light. But the tracks we had been following led directly to this chamber, and they continued beyond it, disappearing into a narrow passage on the far side. Whatever had made those tracks knew about the bones. It had been here before. It came here regularly. I noticed...
I had to pay for a setup because he was working in it. For all that money we make, he couldn't afford it.
Lord. What's up, Bugs?
Hey. So there you go.
What you got?
Got the stars.
Something else. The animal bones in the pile were not as old as the human remains. Some of them still had dried tissue attached. Some of them showed marks that looked like they had been gnawed. Something was bringing food to this chamber. Something was eating here, regularly. "We need to leave," Brenna said. Her voice had lost its professional steadiness. We need to get out and report this. She was right. We had found human remains. Protocol required us to withdraw and notify the authorities. A recovery team would need to come in, document the scene, attempt to identify the victims. But I made a mistake. I wanted to see where the tracks led. I wanted to understand what we were dealing with before we sealed this passage forever. Professional curiosity, scientific interest. Whatever excuse I used at the time, it was the wrong decision. Just a little farther, I said. We document where the tracks go, then we turn back. Orlith looked at me like I had lost my mind. Brenna shook her head. But Declan was already moving toward the far passage, his scanner raised to capture the dimensions. We followed him. The passage beyond the bone chamber was narrower. We had to move single file, our packs scraping against the walls. The tracks continued ahead of us, pressed into mud that grew softer and wetter as we descended. The smell grew stronger. That unfamiliar odor I had noticed at the entrance became more pronounced, more concentrated. My brain kept trying to identify it and kept failing. After another 30 minutes, the passage opened into a second chamber. Smaller than the first, maybe 20 feet across. The ceiling was low here, barely 8 feet. The walls glistened with moisture. Something was already there. I saw it for only a few seconds before it moved. Pale, elongated, limbs that bent at angles that seemed wrong. It was crouched near the far wall, its back to us, doing something I could not identify. Its hands were moving over the stone in a pattern that looked almost deliberate, almost purposeful. Then it heard us. It turned. Not fast. Slow and deliberate. Like something that had never needed to hurry because nothing in its world posed a threat. Like something that owned this darkness and knew that anything entering its territory was already trapped. Its face was flat. No eyes that I could see. Just smooth, pale skin where eyes should have been, stretched over a skull that was too narrow, too elongated. A mouth that was too wide, filled with teeth that caught our headlamp beams and reflected them back like polished bone. The teeth were not human teeth. They were sharp, pointed, designed for tearing. It stood up. It was tall, taller than any of us. Its limbs were too long, jointed in places that did not correspond to human anatomy.
It can run license plates reading, facial mapping, and even audio monitoring, guys, when you walk through here. This one's active currently. This unit doesn't watch, guys. It participates in signal harvesting, meaning it's an emotional pattern detector. It logs how people move when they're anxious, when they pause, or even turn around and look at it. It creates emotion maps for the whole location. It has resonance scraping. Anyone walking through the camera's radius emits biofield data, especially sensitive individuals. Their mood, tension, and even spiritual signal gets mirrored and tagged. It's a surveillance anchor also. These towers create a grid lock point. Once placed, the entire energy around them starts bending toward passivity. Don't notice me frequency. The unit is purposely placed in almost empty lot. Always, if you look for these guys, you'll notice that they sit by themselves mostly. It's to cloak its presence and to act as a passive field scanner, not a deterrent. This is not just about crime prevention, it's about testing signal responses in isolation zones. You get it, guys?